The Vale family estate sprawled across the hillside like a jewel box open to the sun. White tents billowed in the summer breeze, their silk panels catching light and scattering it across tables laden with flowers and fine china. Musicians tuned their instruments near the fountain while guests arrived in carriages, their laughter floating through the afternoon air like champagne bubbles. Celestine, her fingers trailing along the stone wall that separated the manicured gardens from the wild forest beyond. She wore a dress of deep violet, simple but elegant, something she had sewn herself during quiet evenings in her workshop. The fabric moved like water when she walked. But here among the peacock colors of the wedding guests, she felt like a shadow. Her sister Rosalind held court at the center of everything. Radiant in cream silk embroidered with gold thread, her gown had cost more than most families earned in a year, a gift from her groom Davian Cross, whose merchant fleet controlled trade routes across 3 kingdoms. Rosalind laughed at something a guest said, her hand resting on Davian's arm with practiced grace. She had always known how to shine, how to draw every eye in a room and hold them captive. Celestine had learned early that comparisons were inevitable. The beautiful sister and the strange one. The charming daughter and the girl who spent her time in the mountains, claiming she could hear dragons speak. Their parents had worried about Celestine's flights of fancy, as they called them. But Rosalind had simply smiled and collected admirers. While her younger sister wandered the high peaks alone, a woman at the nearest table leaned toward her companion, voice carrying further than she intended. Such a shame about the younger Vale girl. Still unmarried at 23, and with those odd habits. I heard she was seen talking to herself near Dragon's Ridge last month. Celestine's jaw tightened, but she kept her eyes on the forest. She had not been talking to herself. Thornwick had been teaching her about the ancient songs, the ones that bound the mountain to the sky. But explaining that to people who thought dragons were nothing but legends would only prove their point about her strangeness. She slipped away from the main gathering, following a stone path that wound through rose bushes toward the old greenhouse at the garden's edge. The building was mostly forgotten now, its glass panels clouded with age, vines creeping up the iron framework. Inside, the air was thick and green, filled with the scent of earth and growing things. Celestine had claimed this space years ago, turning it into a sanctuary where she could work on her drawings and studies without judgment. She was examining a sketch of dragonwing patterns when she heard footsteps on the path outside. Heavy, measured, unfamiliar. Through the clouded glass, she saw a figure approaching, tall and broad-shouldered, moving with the kind of confidence that suggested he had never doubted his right to walk anywhere he pleased. The greenhouse door opened with a creak of hinges. The man who entered had to duck slightly to clear the frame. He wore traveling clothes, well made but dusty from the road, and his dark hair was tied back from a face that might have been carved from mountain stone. His eyes, when they found hers, were the color of storm clouds, gray and unreadable. "You should not be here," Celestine said, closing her sketchbook quickly. "This is private property, so I was told," the stranger replied, his voice carrying an accent she could not quite place. "Yet here I am, and here you are, both of us escaping what appears to be quite the celebration." "I am not escaping. I am working." His gaze swept the greenhouse, taking in the drawings pinned to makeshift boards. The books stacked on an old work table, the carefully labeled specimens of mountain plants. Working on what, exactly? Celestine hesitated. Most people dismissed her studies as childish fascination. But something about the stranger's expression made her reconsider her usual deflection. Dragon lore. Migration patterns, communication methods, territorial boundaries. Instead of laughing, the man stepped closer, examining one of her detailed maps. "The Forbidden Peaks," he said, tracing a route she had marked. "You have walked these paths." "I have." She studied him more carefully now. "Who are you?" "Someone who believes dragons are more than legends." He turned to face her fully, and for the first time she saw what looked like respect in his eyes. "My name is Gareth Stone. I came to this wedding at Davian's invitation, though we are old acquaintances rather than friends. I arrived late, found the gathering overwhelming, and sought quieter ground, and happened upon the one person who would rather be anywhere else." It seems we are both skilled at spotting kindred spirits. Gareth's expression softened slightly. Or perhaps at recognizing those who do not belong in gilded cages. Before Celestine could respond, voices erupted from the main garden. She heard her mother calling her name, the tone sharp with irritation. Gareth glanced toward the sound, then back at her. They are looking for you. They always are. When they remember I exist. Celestine gathered her sketchbook, preparing to return to her duties as the forgotten sister. Usually to ask why I cannot be more like Rosalind. A terrible waste, Gareth said quietly. To spend your life comparing starlight to sunlight, as if both did not have their own beauty. The words stopped her at the threshold. She turned, found him still watching her with those storm-gray eyes, and felt something shift in her chest like the first crack in winter ice. Will you be staying for the celebration? She asked. That depends. He moved toward the door, stopping close enough that she could smell pine and mountain air on his clothes. Will there be more interesting company than champagne and empty compliments? I make no promises. Wedding guests rarely seek the strange sister's conversation. Then perhaps I am not like most wedding guests. He stepped past her onto the path, then paused. There is a clearing in the forest beyond your eastern wall. Tomorrow at dawn, if you walk there, you might see something worth sketching. Dragons, I am told, favor that spot when the morning mist rises. Celestine's heart jumped. How do you know that? But Gareth was already walking away, his form disappearing between the rose bushes, leaving her with questions multiplying like sparks from struck flint. She stood in the greenhouse doorway, her mother's voice growing more insistent, and wondered what kind of man knew dragon paths and spoke of belonging to no gilded cages. The wedding celebration continued. Without her full attention, Celestine moved through the required motions, smiling at appropriate moments, accepting congratulations to pass along to her sister. But her mind was in the mountains, in the clearing Gareth had mentioned, wondering if tomorrow's dawn would bring answers or simply more mysteries. As twilight painted the sky purple and gold, she caught sight of Gareth across the garden. He stood alone near the fountain, watching the celebration with the detached interest of someone observing a play. Their eyes met across the distance, and he raised his glass slightly, a gesture that felt like acknowledgement and promise combined. Celestine turned away, her pulse racing, and slipped back toward the greenhouse. Tomorrow, she would walk to that clearing. Tomorrow she would discover what this strange man knew about dragons and why his words had struck something deep inside her that had been silent. For too long, the stars emerged, one by one. Above the Vale estate, as music drifted through the summer night, somewhere in the mountains, Thornwick lifted his emerald head and tasted the changing wind, sensing shifts in the patterns he had guarded for centuries, and in the shadows between celebration and solitude, Celestine Vale made a choice that would alter the course of her life in ways she could not yet imagine. Dawn broke over the Vale estate with fingers of gold and pink spreading across the sky. Celestine had barely slept, her mind racing with possibilities and doubts. She dressed in practical clothes, sturdy boots, and a simple tunic, then slipped from the house while the wedding guests still slumbered off their celebrations. The eastern wall was older than the rest of the estate, built from rough-hewn stone that had weathered centuries of mountain storms. Celestine found the gap she had used since childhood, a place where the stones had shifted enough to allow passage. Beyond lay the wild forest, untamed and ancient, where few from the village dared to venture. She walked through morning mist that clung to the ground like silk scarves, her breath visible in the cool air. Birds called from the canopy above, their songs echoing through the trees. The path was faint, more suggestion than trail, but her feet knew the way. She had walked these woods countless times, drawn by something she could never fully explain to others. The clearing appeared suddenly, a perfect circle where trees gave way to open sky. Moss carpeted the ground, emerald and soft, dotted with wildflowers that seemed to glow in the early light. And there, standing at the center, was Gareth Stone. But he was not alone. Celestine froze, her heart hammering against her ribs. Beside Gareth, stood a creature from dreams and nightmares combined. She was tall, nearly matching his height, with a form that blended human grace with something utterly other. Silver fur covered her arms and legs, catching the dawn light like moonbeams. Crystalline horns curved back from her forehead, transparent and gleaming. Her face held human beauty, but with sharper angles. More defined features, and her eyes were the color of deep amber, vertical pupils contracting as they fixed on Celestine. "Do not run," Gareth said quietly, his voice carrying clearly across the clearing. "Morella means you no harm." Celestine's training, all her years studying creatures others dismissed as myth, fought against her instinctive fear. She had read accounts of monster folk in ancient texts, beings who existed between worlds, neither fully human nor beast. Most scholars claimed they were extinct, driven out, or destroyed centuries ago by fearful populations. "She is real," Celestine whispered, wonder beginning to overtake fear. "We are real," Morella corrected, her voice like wind chimes, musical and strange. "Though your kind has worked hard to forget us." The monster girl moved with fluid grace, each step deliberate and careful, as if she feared Celestine might bolt like a startled deer. Up close, Celestine could see more details. Morella's hands bore delicate claws instead of nails. And beneath the silver fur, intricate patterns seemed to shift and change like living artwork. "Why show me this?" Celestine asked, looking between them. "Why reveal yourself?" Gareth stepped forward, his expression serious. "Because you are one of the few who might understand. You speak with dragons, Celestine Vale. You have walked between worlds yourself, even if you did not realize it." Thornwick told you. It was not a question. The ancient dragon must have sensed Gareth's arrival, recognized something in him.
"Alwick has watched over these lands?"
"Longer than your family has owned them," Gareth confirmed. "He knows that change is coming, that the old barriers between worlds are weakening. Monster folk are returning, dragons are waking, and humanity must choose whether to welcome or destroy." Morella's amber eyes held sadness that seemed ancient. "My people once lived alongside yours. We shared knowledge, built wonders together. But fear is a poison that spreads quickly. When the plagues came, when crops failed, humans looked for something to blame. We became monsters in truth because that was easier than accepting that sometimes the world is cruel without reason." Celestine felt her worldview shifting. All the comfortable certainties she had built around her studies crumbling. "The histories say your kind attacked villages, killed innocents." "Some did," Morella admitted, her voice heavy. "Just as some humans murdered entire settlements of my people. Fear breeds violence on all sides. But I am not my ancestors' sins, many more than you are responsible for the witch burnings and monster hunts of centuries past." A sound like distant thunder rolled across the clearing. Celestine looked up to see a shape descending from the clouds, massive wings beating the air. Thornwick landed with surprising gentleness for something so large, his emerald scales gleaming wet with morning dew. The dragon folded his wings and lowered his great head to regard the three of them with eyes older than mountains. "Little speaker," Thornwick's voice resonated in Celestine's mind, the way it always did. "You have found the path I hoped you would walk." "You planned this," Celestine said, understanding blooming. "The wedding, Gareth's arrival, everything." "I simply opened doors," the dragon replied. "You chose to step through them." Gareth moved to stand beside Morella, and Celestine noticed how natural they seemed together, how his hand found hers without looking. "We need your help," he said. "The Elder Council in your village discovered evidence of monster folk returning to the region. They plan to send hunters into the mountains to eliminate any threats before they can establish territory." "Threats," Morella repeated bitterly. "We only want to live to exist without hiding. But your council sees fangs and fur and assumes we are beasts to be slaughtered." Celestine's mind raced. She thought of the council members, stern men and women who valued order and tradition above all else. They would never listen to her, the strange veiled girl who talked to dragons. But perhaps there was another way. "The wedding guests," she said slowly. Davian invited merchants and nobles from across the kingdom. People with influence, with power, to sway the council. If they could see what I am seeing, If they could understand that monster folk are not the enemy, they would need proof, Gareth said. And trust. Two things in short supply when fear rules hearts. Thornwick shifted, his scales rustling like armor. The old magic still binds some oaths. A joining ceremony performed under dragon witness would carry weight even the council could not ignore. If a human chose to bind their fate to one of monster blood, it would demonstrate that coexistence is possible. Celestine looked at Morella, at the hope and wariness mixed in those amber eyes. She thought of all the years she had spent alone, studying creatures others dismissed, walking paths nobody else dared. She had always known she was different, had always felt the pull of something beyond the ordinary world. What would such a ceremony require? She asked quietly. A willing heart, Thornwick answered, and courage to stand against those who would tear down what you build. The sun climbed higher, burning away the mist. Celestine made her decision in the space between one breath and the next. She stepped forward, closing the distance to Morella, and extended her hand. I am Celestine Vale, she said formally. I offer you welcome and witness. Morella's eyes widened, surprise and something like wonder crossing her face. She reached out slowly, her clawed hand gentle as it clasped Celestine's. I am Morella of the Silver Wood, she replied, her voice thick with emotion. And I accept your witness with gratitude. Gareth watched them both, respect clear in his expression. Then we have our beginning, he said. Now comes the harder part, convincing others to follow where you lead. They spent the morning in the clearing, planning and preparing. Thornwick shared knowledge of ancient customs, the proper words and rituals that would bind their ceremony to old magic. Gareth explained the political landscape, who among the wedding guests might be sympathetic, who would need careful convincing. And Morella spoke of her people, the scattered communities hiding in mountain caves and deep forests, waiting for a sign that it was safe to emerge as midday approached. Celestine knew she had to return before her absence raised too many questions. But as she prepared to leave, Morella caught her hand. Why? The monster girl asked softly. Why risk everything for people you do not know? Celestine met those amber eyes and saw her own isolation reflected back. Because I understand what it means to be called monster, she said. To be feared for being different, and because the world needs more bridges than walls. She walked back through the forest, her mind full of dragons and ceremonies and impossible choices. When she emerged from the trees, she found her sister waiting by the garden wall. Rosalind stood with arms crossed, still wearing her nightgown and robe, her perfect hair disheveled. Where have you been? She demanded. Mother is furious. You missed the morning farewell breakfast. I was walking, Celestine said simply. Walking. Rosalind's eyes narrowed. You are always walking, always disappearing. Do you know how embarrassing it is, having to explain why my sister cannot be bothered to attend her own family's celebrations? The words that would have stung yesterday felt distant now. Celestine had seen wonders in the clearing, had touched hands with a being from legend, had been chosen by a dragon to help reshape the world. Her sister's disappointment seemed small by comparison. I am sorry, she said, and meant it. But I have something important to do. Something that matters more than breakfast etiquette. Rosalind stared at her, confusion replacing anger. What has gotten into you? Courage, Celestine answered. Finally? The wedding guests had planned to depart that afternoon, returning to their various estates and businesses. But Gareth, moving with quiet authority, convinced Davian to extend the celebration one more day. A final gathering, he suggested, to properly honor the newlyweds and strengthen the bonds between all the families present. Celestine spent the afternoon in careful preparation. She spoke first with Thornwick, who agreed to make himself visible to the assembled guests at the proper time. Then she found Gareth and Morella at the forest edge, helping them plan their entrance and the words they would speak. They will be afraid, Morella said, anxiety threading through her musical voice. Fear makes people cruel. Fear also makes them listen, Gareth replied. When confronted with something they cannot ignore, they must choose a response. We simply need to make the right choice easier than the wrong one. As twilight approached, servants set up torches around the main garden, creating a circle of firelight that pushed back the gathering dark. Guests assembled, curious about this unexpected addition to the celebration. Rosalind and Davian stood at the center, clearly confused but gracious, accepting congratulations and well wishes. Celestine waited at the edge of the forest, her heart hammering. She had changed into a dress of deep green, the color of dragon scales, and woven mountain flowers into her hair. Beside her, Morella wore a cloak that concealed her true form, though her nervousness was palpable. "Once we step into that light," Celestine said quietly, "there is no going back." "There was no going back the moment you took my hand this morning," Morella replied. "We are bound now, by choice and magic. Whatever comes, we face it together." Gareth appeared from the shadows, dressed formally now, his expression calm but his eyes alert. "The council members are here," he warned. 3 of them, including Elder Bartholomew. He leads the faction calling for monster hunts. "Then we give them something to hunt," Celestine said, surprising herself with her boldness. "We give them truth." She stepped into the torchlight, Morella at her side, Gareth just behind. Conversations faltered, heads turned, curious eyes fixing on the unexpected trio. Celestine walked steadily toward the center of the gathering where her sister stood. "Forgive the interruption," Celestine said, her voice carrying clearly through the quiet. "But I come with a request that cannot wait. I ask for witness and blessing for a joining ceremony." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Rosalind's eyes went wide, a smile starting to form. "Celestine, are you saying you are to be married?" "Not exactly." Celestine looked at Gareth, who nodded encouragement. She turned back to face the assembled guests, drew a deep breath, and spoke words that would change everything. "I am to be bound by ancient right to one of the monster folk in testimony that 2 worlds can exist as one." The murmurs exploded into shouts. Guests lurched backward, some reaching for weapons they had not brought to a wedding. The council members pushed forward, Elder Bartholomew's face purple with rage. "This is madness," he bellowed. "Monster folk are dangerous, unpredictable. They cannot be trusted. And yet you trust dragons?" Celestine countered, her voice steady. "Thornwick has guarded these mountains for centuries. You pray to him for good harvests, safe travels. If you can accept one inhuman protector, why not others?" As if summoned by his name, Thornwick descended from the sky. The dragon landed beyond the garden wall, but his massive form was visible to all, scales gleaming in the torchlight. His presence silenced even the loudest objections, raw power demanding respect. "I witnessed this joining," Thornwick's voice echoed in the minds of everyone present, a sensation that left most gasping. "I, who have walked this world since before your grandparents were born, say that monster folk have as much right to exist as humans or dragons. Those who would deny this truth deny the natural order itself." Morella let her cloak fall. Silver fur caught the firelight. Crystalline horns refracted flame into rainbow colors. She stood proud despite the gasps and frightened cries, her amber eyes sweeping the crowd with dignity. "I am Morella," she said, her wind chime voice somehow reaching every ear. "I do not ask you to love me. I ask only that you see me as I am, not as your fears paint me. I wish to live in peace, to share knowledge with those who would learn, to build rather than destroy. Elder." Bartholomew found his voice again. "Pretty words from a monster? We have histories, records of your kind's violence." "And we have records of yours," Gareth said, stepping forward. "I have traveled to the hidden archives, seen the true histories your council keeps locked away. Humans struck first in the old wars. Fearing what they did not understand, they attacked settlements, drove entire species to extinction. The violence that followed was retaliation, not initiation." Another council member shouted, "Then explain this." Gareth produced a scroll, ancient parchment carefully preserved. "A treaty signed 3 centuries ago between your ancestors and the Silverwood clans. A promise of peace and cooperation broken when the first plague came and humans needed scapegoats." The scroll passed through hands, examined by scholars and nobles. Celestine watched faces change as they read, anger giving way to uncertainty, doubt creeping in where certainty had stood. Rosalind approached slowly, studying Morella with fascination rather than fear. "You truly mean no harm?" she asked. "I truly mean to live," Morella replied simply. "As you do?" "As all creatures do." Celestine's sister looked at her, really looked at her, for perhaps the first time in years. "You believe this? You believe they can coexist with us?" "I know it," Celestine said, "because I have walked between both worlds my entire life. Dragons taught me that different does not mean dangerous. Now I ask all of you to learn the same lesson." Thornwick shifted, drawing all eyes to his massive form. "I offer binding magic," the dragon announced. "Let Celestine Vale and Morella of the Silver would join their fates under my witness. If their bond holds true for 1 full year, let it stand as proof that coexistence is possible. If it fails, if either seeks to harm the other, then let the council's fears be justified." Elder Bartholomew sputtered. "You ask us to wait a year while monsters gather in our mountains?" "I ask you to wait a year while bridges are built," Thornwick countered. "Unless you prefer to explain to these noble guests why you would rather start a war than attempt peace."
Ah,
The nobles and merchants exchanged glances. War meant disrupted trade, endangered routes, lost profits. Peace, even uncertain peace with strange beings, was infinitely preferable. Political pressure began to shift, and Celestine saw Bartholomew recognize that he was losing ground. "Very well," the elder said grudgingly. 1 year. But any sign of violence, any hint of danger, and we respond with full force," agreed, Morella said before anyone could object. "We ask only for fair chance, nothing more." Thornwick lowered his great head, breathing out a mist that smelled of ancient forests and mountain peaks. "Then let the ceremony begin." The ritual was simple, but profound. Celestine and Morella stood facing each other in the center of the garden, while Thornwick wove words of binding in the old language. Gareth translated for the guests, his voice steady and clear. The two women clasped hands, human flesh and silver fur intertwined. While dragon magic hummed around them like a living thing, "Do you choose this bond freely?" Thornwick asked in all their minds. "I do," Celestine answered, her voice unwavering. "I do," Morella echoed, tears gleaming in her amber eyes. "Then by my witness and the old laws, you are bound. 2 souls, 2 worlds, 1 purpose. Let none tear asunder what magic has joined." Light flared from their clasped hands, green and silver mixing, spiraling upward into the night sky. Guests shielded their eyes from the brilliance. When it faded, a mark remained on both women's wrists, intertwined vines for Celestine, crystalline patterns for Morella, each bearing touches of the other's symbol. The binding was complete. Silence held for a heartbeat, then 2. Finally, Davian stepped forward and began to applaud. Rosalind joined him, then others, until the garden filled with the sound of acceptance. Not all clapped, and some faces remained fearful or angry, but the gesture had been made. Witness had been given, as the gathered crowd began to disperse, some approaching to examine the binding marks with curiosity, others retreating to process what they had seen. Celestine felt Gareth's hand on her shoulder. "You did it," he said quietly. "You opened the door." "We did it," she corrected, looking at Morella, who stood surrounded by brave souls, asking careful questions. "All of us together." Thornwick spread his wings, preparing to return to his mountain peak. But before he launched himself skyward, his voice touched Celestine's mind one final time. "You were never the forgotten sister, little speaker. You were simply waiting for the moment when the world would be ready to see you. That moment has arrived." The dragon took flight, his emerald form disappearing into the stars. Celestine stood in the garden that had felt like a cage just yesterday, now transformed into the birthplace of something new. Change would not come easily, she knew. The year ahead would bring challenges, conflicts, moments when fear threatened to overwhelm hope. But as Morella returned to her side, silver fur brushing against her arm as Gareth smiled with quiet pride, as even her sister looked at her with new respect, Celestine understood that she had found her purpose, not in being overlooked or compared, but in standing as a bridge between worlds, in choosing courage over comfort, The wedding celebration had ended. But a new story, one of dragons and monsters and the humans brave enough to walk between them, was only beginning. And for the first time in her life, Celestine Vale stood at the center of it all. No longer a shadow, but a light guiding the way forward.